Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Heart Breathings. I have just gotten back from Inkers Con, which was incredible. But also, when you go to a conference, there's so much input of information that I have had to really get back on my focus game. And so I thought perfect video because I know that so many of us struggle with how to focus and follow through. And then also how to refocus yourself once you're already distracted so that you can save a half wasted day. So this is going to be a two-part video. Today, we're going to share some tips on how to get focused and motivated and how to follow through on the things that you want to do. So let's get started. Listen, we're all so different in the way our brains work and what works for us and what trauma we've been through and what's stressing us out right now, in what we're excited about and what we find fun and interesting. We're all different. And so it's really difficult to make a generic, here's 5 tips that are going to work for everybody video that's going to resonate with everyone. So, what I'm going to try this time is to give you 5 tips, but we're really going to lean into here's some other ways of looking at it if the basic tip doesn't work for you. So let me know what you think of this approach. This first video, I'm going to share 5 tips on how to focus and follow through, like how to get focused initially and how to actually get the work done. And then I'm going to also record a video on how to get refocused so that you can save a day that feels like has gone to distraction. So 2 parts video. Definitely subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and make a comment down below if you enjoy this format. And let's get started. So, tip number 1 is to really lean into what works for you. And I know some of you might be like, I'm here to try to figure out what works for me. But I guarantee you that there are things in your past that have always worked for you. And I think sometimes where we go wrong is that we listen to podcasts, we see videos like this, we talk to other people, and often we hear advice that we're like, okay, yes, what they said is I need a clean, organized space. So let me try cleaning up my space and getting organized. And it doesn't work. But then when you get into chaos again, you think, okay, remember that tip. Somebody else said I need a clean space. Let me get that done. And it still doesn't work for you. So, what I'm going to encourage you to do is actually, instead of listening necessarily, I mean, obviously, I want you to listen to the rest of this video, but instead of listening to other people's tips and what you think you should do to focus. So, I want you to try this instead. Sit down with a notebook or piece of paper, index card or something, and I want you to think back in your life, doesn't matter how far back, or it could have just been yesterday, to a project that you or a task that you did really well, that you feel like, wow, I just sat down and I focused and I got it done. And it was easier to find focus in this environment or on this particular type of task and with these set of circumstances. And then write down all of the things you can think about that may have been a factor in why you were so successful. So, for example, if you start to think about the last book that you wrote, when did you have your most productive writing sessions? Think about your environment. Were you at home in an organized space, or were you out at a coffee shop with lots of energy around you? Were you having noise canceling headphones on? Were you, away at a hotel so that there was nobody distracting you or coming into your office? What was your environment like? What was the situation like? You can also start to think about what type of stress was I under during that time? Did I have a deadline that I was working toward? Did I have just lots of space and freedom to work on whatever I wanted? Was I focused on one particular book, or was I writing multiple things at once? Even the things that you think were mistakes sometimes can be a key to what's your superpower, because often we are judging ourselves based on what other people have told us our process should look like. And that might not work for us. And working against ourselves or constantly beating ourselves up because we don't fit into the typical mold of what productivity looks like might be holding us back in some cases. So think about a time when you were successful, and then write down as many things and factors as you can think about in terms of your mental health, your physical health, your environment, your situation, your stress, your sleep, the type of story you were working on or type of project you were working on, and write down all those factors and see if you can identify a few things in common between different times when you were successful at being focused. Because you might find that something like, wow, every time I was outside writing, or every time I was working on this particular project and listening to music, I got so much more done. once you can identify a few of those types of commonalities, you can really lean into what works for you instead of trying to make yourself fit into a mold of what works for other people. So, this for me has been a really big game changer because I am starting to identify some things that really do work for me and some things that every time I get myself into this type of situation, I fall apart. Like some of my tips in the past have been to clean your space because that works for my brain. But I was talking to somebody this weekend at InkersCon who says, I always write better when I've got chaos and notes everywhere and it just becomes my comfort space. So really lean into yourself and stop fighting against yourself in your natural way and see if you can begin to focus more by leaning into what works for your particular brain and your particular process. Tip number 2 is to limit input, which might as well also be eliminate distractions. So, what types of input are distracting you when you're trying to get into a focused state? For me, if I allow people to come in this door when I'm trying to get focused, I'm just going to get interrupted over and over and over again. Also, another big thing I started to realize is that whenever I would go to coffee shops, which used to really work well for me as a focus tool, I had my phone with me and I would notice that I'd think, oh, I've got all my stuff out. Let me create a reel real fast. Let me check in with my friends. Let me see what somebody posted on my last YouTube video. What are those comments? And I would allow myself to get into heavy distraction mode every time I sat down at a coffee shop. It was almost like extreme resistance because of this little device right here. And so when I decided instead to eliminate the input from this device and leave this in my car instead, my productivity went through the roof. And how I know this was working, which really blew my mind, is I set an index card next to me when I was writing. And I would write, and every time I would reach for my phone, I would put a tick mark on the index card. And in the course of just a 30-minute sprint, I had reached for my phone something like 5 or 6 times. And it was this process. I didn't realize I had gotten myself into a distraction routine where every time the writing felt hard, or I felt like I was judging something that was going on the paper, or I felt like I was stressed that it wasn't coming together as quickly as I wanted, I would self soothe by reaching out to my phone to try to get some other kind of dopamine, like let me watch somebody's reels, let me see if somebody left a comment or if I have more likes on my video than I used to. And it was a way of sort of, I felt like encouraging myself, but really I was just allowing myself to continue to get distracted away from the real work, which was the difficult story that I was trying to work on. So once I eliminated distractions, I had a process there of I'm going to put freedom on my devices. So freedom is a software that you can add to like your Chrome extension or to your phone as an app. And with a single click of a button on the website or on the app, you can turn off all of your devices simultaneously. So I can turn off internet on all my computers, my phones, my tablet, any place that I have it with a single click of a button. And I can also allow certain sites to still work. So if I wanted to use Spotify for my music and I wanted to have Google Docs open for my writing, I could keep those two with internet access, but everything else was gone. So I couldn't check YouTube comments. I couldn't check Instagram comments. And that was such a game changer. I did still notice though that I'm searching through and scrolling through music. So my awareness was, okay, let me get a really low key MP3 player. It was like 25 bucks on Amazon. And so I just didn't even bring my phone in at all. I didn't need any music from there. I just used the MP3 player with my headphones and boom, I started finishing my book. In fact, I'm very close to announcing a release date coming up. And that would not have been possible if I hadn't limited the input that I was allowing into my brain. So if you find that you're constantly getting distracted, one thing that I highly recommend as an action step you can start taking today is decide on a task, something that you're going to focus on for the next hour. It could be social media creation, it could be writing, it could be just any task or project that you want to work on for, let's say, at least 30 minutes, if not an hour. Pick a stretch of time, pick a focus, and put at the top of your index card or your notebook, this is the task I'm focusing on right now. So I might put editing Disappearance of Vanessa Shaw. Set a timer for however long you want to try to work undistracted. And then every single time you get distracted, interrupted, change tasks, switch to a different focus other than the thing that is on your paper, make a tick mark, and then write what it is that distracted you. So it might be like, tick mark, Evie came in and asked me for lunch. Tick mark, I got an email notification and now I'm off and checking my email for 30 minutes. Check mark, I got distracted by a difficult sentence I was trying to edit and I went off and started hanging out on Instagram and got lost there for 30 minutes. Just take inventory of how many times you're getting distracted, what other type of input is coming at you, and then be like an investigator here and go through and say, okay, where am I mostly getting distracted and which of these distractions can I eliminate as soon as possible? So put a sign on your door so your daughter doesn't come and interrupt you. Turn on something like turn off your notifications on your devices, turn on something like freedom so you can't get distracted. Become aware of when you're trying to self-soothe because the work got hard, and either find a way to refocus yourself, which we're going to talk about in my next video, or be aware of it and just continue to give yourself a pep talk in your mind of like, I can do this. I know it's hard. I'm going to keep going. Or you could even switch to a different part of your story. Like if I got to a piece of my edits that were getting really difficult, I could just switch to a different piece of it. And that would be super helpful. Just a little side note to that too is our distractions and our input isn't always external. It's also sometimes coming from our own minds. Like what's currently stressing us? What conversation do we need to have that we're letting ruminate and play over and over in our minds? What negative comment did someone post on your book or negative review that now you can't stop thinking about? It can be very difficult to actually focus when there's so much input coming from our own brain from the stress that we're under. So it might be helpful to just write that out and convince your mind that I'm dealing with that conversation or I have already dealt with that conversation, or to just go ahead and have that conversation so that you can sit down focused and ready to go. Number 3 is to determine your ideal stretch of time. So we talk a lot on this channel about Pomodoros, or what I call task blocks in my HB90 system. And a task block or a Pomodoro is basically like a 30-minute chunk of time that you take 25 minutes to work, 5 minutes to break, and then every fourth one you take a longer break. And this has been shown to be really good for a focused period of time with a little bit of a break to move around and get our juices flowing again, and then refocus ourselves with a longer break every once in a while to give ourselves a little bit more refresh time. This really works for me. I love working in task blocks or Pomodoro, but some people do not. And so just because you've had that advice from other people, if 25 minutes doesn't work for you because you feel like you were just getting started and now you're taking a break again, start experimenting with what is my ideal stretch of time. It might be an hour. It might be that you prefer to work in 2-hour chunks with a quick 5-minute break at the top of the hour instead of chunk, 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 chunk. You need long, expansive periods of time and then long, expansive breaks. And you might not know that if you've never tried it, if you've just been listening to other people's advice. So your action step for this one is to experiment over the next week with different periods of time. I do actually have an entire workbook inside the HB resource library that you can get for free if you're a subscriber on my newsletter that was a sprinting challenge that we did a couple of times in the past. And that's specifically for writing sprints to see if you write more in 15-minute chunks or 30-minute chunks or hour-long chunks, and to see when is your best time of day that you're most focused on your writing. But you could actually apply this to any type of task. And you might be able to create an ideal schedule for yourself where you say, when I'm working on social media, it's helpful to have really long stretches of time so that I can batch content. So in this case, I want 2 full hours without a break. Or you might say, I am neurospicy. And when I get into a hyper focus mode, it's really good for me to allow myself to work in long chunks of time and to be very focused on what I'm doing. But then when I'm not in a hyper focus mode, I need something else to keep me on task. So it's helpful to have a post-it note and a timer handy to keep me on track. You can create your own productivity system to work for you. And so just remember that you have that freedom to be aware of what works for you as an individual. Different types of tasks might do better different times a day. Different types of tasks or projects might do better in long chunks or smaller chunks. So experiment with it this week, make some notes. Dare I say, create an entire notebook that becomes your productivity experiment notebook, and start becoming aware of what's your ideal stretch of time to work, and then really lean into that. Number 4 is where most of my passion lies, which is to balance your plate. When we think about getting focused, sometimes we don't really think so much about how much we have on our plate. We're just thinking about, oh my gosh, I need to get focused and I'm being so distracted right now. But the truth is that we all have our own individual capacity for how much we can sort of keep in our to do list in our brain. And when we've overloaded it and we've put too much on our plate, it becomes a distraction because I can't be working on this video right now without also feeling stressed or worried about I'm behind on this book and I've got to get this done and I've got to do that because there's just too many things going on in my brain. I have too much on my plate to get done today. And so I can't seem to follow through with any one task without already feeling stress about not being able to get it all done. On the flip side, though, when I have almost nothing on my plate, I'm going to procrastinate until the last minute. So there's no way I'm getting focused. I need a little bit of pressure to focus myself. Other people, if you have any pressure at all, you freeze or you completely stop. And so this is why I wanted to really lean into that first tip of learn who you are and how you work best. And this is really one of the most important ones to figure out is what is your plate tolerance? Like what's the size of your plate? If you are familiar with the spoon theory, that's a very similar type of thing. Becca Syme also talks about energy pennies, and this is a similar type of tip. How big is your individual plate right now? It might not be the same size that it was when you were back in college. It might not even be the same size it was before you had your first child, or if you don't have children, before you got this full time job. We often need to reevaluate the size of our plate based on what we're going through right now, based on what we're working on right now, based on what state of burnout or excitement we're in. So it can be super helpful, especially at the beginning of every quarter, which we're getting very close to Q3 starting here in July 1st, to just take inventory and say, what is my stress tolerance right now? How many do I have too much on my plate? Is that helping me feel pressure or do I feel too much pressure? And have some kind of way of evaluating how much you have on your plate in terms of time and energy. Do you have enough energy to actually execute everything that's on your plan right now? Or are you putting so much on your plate you can't even focus on a single thing because it just feels like there's too much? That sense of being overwhelmed can lead to distraction. When we really wish and what we need is when we have too much on our plate, we need to be focused and it just becomes impossible. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means you need a better plan. You need to take a little bit of that pressure off because you've kind of gone too far. Like if you think about your plate tolerance, or if we want to use a different metaphor, we can talk about a thermostat, right? If your brain is most comfortable at 72 degrees, maybe you've taken yourself up to 77 or 82 degrees in your brain house. I don't know if that makes sense. And you've just made it too hot. There's too much stuff going on. It's too many hamsters on tiny little wheels inside your brain, and it's just not allowing you to focus on one thing because there's just the buzz of all the different things. You just need to bring that down a little bit. Doesn't mean you need to drop everything, but you just need to bring it down. For some people, it's like you've taken it all the way down to 67 and you don't feel that pressure anymore. So you're just procrastinating and you're just not getting it done. You can't find it hard to focus because you don't really care about what you're working on. So let's pull it back up to that ideal 72 and become more aware of how much we're putting on our plate. If you want help with this, I have such a great solution with the HB90 method, and we are starting this Sunday. So come join us if you want, because this is really one of the best ways to evaluate like what's working right now, what's not working, how much time and energy do I actually have, and what are my goals, and put all that together into a very clear plan that for me and for so many other people creates its own momentum and kind of puts you at that perfect temperature so that you can have just enough to give you the pressure to get it done, but not so much that you feel overwhelmed. Final tip, set clear micro intentions. So we don't necessarily all need to create hyper specific to do lists for every single thing that we're doing in our lives. But sometimes what goes wrong when it comes to our focus is that we sit down with a very generic idea of what we want to do. I'm going to work on social media. And that's what my plan says, work on social media. But we don't actually have a very clear objective as to what we're going to get done within that project. And so we sit down and it's easy to get distracted because I don't have a checklist of exactly what I want to do. I'm just supposed to randomly work on social media. Or it might say, write, or it might say, create something new for Etsy, or whatever it is. but that doesn't feel very motivating when you don't have specifics. It also doesn't focus you in on exactly what you're trying to get done. What I find is that when I have something like, okay, I've got this block of time that I'm going to work on a YouTube video like I'm doing right now, it's so helpful for me to take my planner and actually make a checklist first thing when I sit down that says, here's what I'm going to do with this video. First, I'm going to outline it and give 5 tips. Next, I'm going to set up everything that I need and get ready to be on camera. Third, I'm going to hit record. Fourth, I'm going to go upstairs and I'm going to edit it. So I would actually write this down every little step. And you could get even more granular than that, like I have here. Tip number 1 is this. Tip number 2 is this. Tip number 3 is this. And I'm making my way through these tips one at a time, but it doesn't allow me to lose focus because I've got a very clear objective as what's next. It's like giving myself a roadmap. If you got in the car and you said, I don't know, I just think I'm going to drive to California today, you would know I'm heading west and you wouldn't really know exactly which path to take. So it's easy to get distracted, have to pull over, ask for directions. You feel lost, you feel anxious. But if you have a GPS, you have a path laid out that says turn here, go right here, stop here for gas, then you are more likely to make it there in the most efficient period of time because you have a clear set of directions of how to get there. Do the same thing with your daily tasks. When you sit down to work on something, just write down a micro list. Now, the combination of things that I like to do is at the beginning of every quarter, I decide what are my goals. I break those goals down into projects that I think I can get done that will help me reach those goals. So if I want to increase my income by $1,000 a month, I'll choose projects that I think are going to help me increase my income. And then I break those projects down into clear tasks, things like work on social media or post on social media for week 1, week 10, week 3, all of those things. And I'll break down those tasks. And those are pretty clear tasks, but I need to get even more micro when I sit down with my intentions and I'm actually going to execute it. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take that Post-it note off my Kanban board. You all have mostly seen my Kanban board. If not, there's a whole playlist here on YouTube called Kanban board. And this is all in conjunction with HB90, which I know a lot of you use. So I would pull that task down that says social media week 1, put it in my planner for today. Then when I'm actually going to sit down and do it, I work ideally in that when I'm doing videos or I'm working on social media in more like an hour long chunk rather than just 30 minutes because I can't record a video in 30 minutes. So I do hour long at a time. I will sit down very first thing and I will take that one task and I will break it down into even smaller, tiny little micro tasks, like a little to-do list checklist of what I'm going to do to accomplish social media week 1, right? And then I will focus myself in and I will get it all done. And because every time I finish a task, I've got a next clear task and I've broken it down into chunks that feel doable, achievable, but still interesting, I can get stuff done. Anytime I leave it as just a generic overarching task and it feels too big to me, allow myself to get distracted because there's some perception in my mind that this is going to be hard. And that difficulty or that it's going to be too big or it's going to take too long or feels difficult just makes my brain kind of check out like, oh, I don't want to do this hard work. I don't want to do this hard work. But when my brain sees, oh, I just have to make the outline. Okay, I can do that. That's the first step. And then I can also kind of give myself a pat on the back. If the whole thing didn't get finished, but I finished 2 of those little micro tasks, I know I still moved forward. And that builds up positive momentum, which is just life changing. So hopefully these tips are helpful for you. I do have 5 more tips plus a bonus tip coming in my next video where we're going to talk about once you have already gotten distracted, how do you refocus yourself? I have some good tips for that. But let me know what you thought of this video. If any of these tips really clicked home for you, definitely subscribe to this channel. If you are not subscribed yet, become a Hardy. We had such a great little Hardy's meetup. So thanks to everybody who was there at InkersCon. And come join us in the HB90 Bootcamp. We kick off this Sunday. And once you've joined, you get lifetime access. So you can go through this over and over again. And I actually had this thought of we're going to experiment and try something new. So I have a new bonus for everybody who's joined this round, as well as all of our alumni, which is we're going to do a live kickoff call on Sunday, but we're also going to have a live closing call that following Saturday. So 2 live calls this time, and everything in between is pre-recorded so that you can go through it at your own pace and you get lifetime access, not only to the course as it is now, but to any updates when I re-record it or continue to improve it in the future. And this time, maybe the only time I'll ever do this, we'll see how it goes. We're going to do a kickoff call and a closing call, and it's going to be super powerful. And I'm going to help you get focused and actually follow through with those big dreams that you have for your life. So come join us. I would love to see you in there. If you've already signed up, I'm so excited. If you're an alumni, come join us again, of course, for free. I will see you in there. Otherwise, I'll see you in part 2 of this video, which is how to get refocused after you've become distracted. So I'll see you then in a few days.